Exercise Theory, Chapter 8, Health-Related Benefits of Basic Nutrition. So nutrition is how food nourishes our bodies. So it includes the nutrients and the energy that our body needs for growth, for tissue repair, for maintenance of a healthy body weight, and for being active. So nutrition is what will fuel hypertrophy when we're exercising, that will rebuild our bodies after a workout to make us stronger and faster and larger. It will also help us with puberty, and from growing from a toddler into puberty, etc. This is where we get the energy and the ability to grow. So nutrients. So the food that we eat, so when we consume foods, it's going to contain nutrients that carry out life-sustaining functions in our bodies. So we consume food, we ingest it, and then it gets broken down in our digestive tract. It's digested. When it gets broken down, it's actually going to be broken down into the different nutrients. These nutrients are going to be absorbed into our bloodstream, and then they'll be delivered to every cell in our bodies. So there's approximately 50 different nutrients that are needed regularly. And we think of this as 6 categories of nutrients. So the 6 categories or groups of nutrients. The first one are carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are going to be our main source of energy. So carbohydrates, you're thinking grains, you're thinking fruits, vegetables, anything like that, and these items will contain carbohydrates, which are easily broken down into the basic sugars and then used as an energy source. We also require fat. Fat has a bad reputation. You hear people talk a lot about low-fat diets, etc. The reality is that fat is essential for our health. We must consume fat. We use it as a source of energy. Our body fat itself will help to cushion our vital organs. But very important is that fat is going to transport, and it's also going to store some of our fat-soluble vitamins like vitamins A and D. Fat is also going to be part of every cell membrane. So our body is created out of cells. And our cell membrane, that's the outer part of our cells that allow different nutrients and different things to flow in and out of the cell. And so that cell membrane is built up of fats, okay? Phospholipids build up that cell membrane. The other things too is actually hormones. Different hormones require fat. So fat is essential. Now, it gets a bad rep because fat contains a lot more calories per gram. So we can run into problems with our diet when we're consuming higher fat items because we don't always pay attention to how many calories we then end up consuming. So fat itself is not bad, it's absolutely essential, but we do have to monitor what we are consuming to make sure we're not consuming it at too high of levels, which would then lead to weight gain. The next one is protein. Now, proteins are what helps us build, maintain, and repair our body tissue and our bone. So protein is found obviously in in meat products. Okay, that's usually where most people think of when they think about protein. But as we'll see shortly, there are a lot of good examples of vegetable-based and plant-based proteins. So for those that are vegetarian or vegan, they're still able to get their protein requirements through their diet. They might have to put a little bit more attention and care into it to make sure they're getting it, but that animal products are not the only source of protein. Protein too is essential. So after we've done our workouts and we've been to the gym, we've been to classes, after we're finished, our body will use our proteins to rebuild our muscles, to make our muscles stronger, to fix any kind of tissue issues. So that is how we will use protein. Vitamins. Vitamins we get in through our foods, and the best way to get our vitamins and our minerals are in a natural form. So when we get into the Canada Food Guide, this is why they're recommending so much fruits and vegetables and grains, etc., to get the required vitamins and minerals. So vitamins trigger reactions in cells, and we have a long list of different vitamins that we consume and require, and those vitamins can have different functions. We want to make sure, once again, that we have a nice colorful diet, that we're taking in vegetables of different colors, because those different colors of vegetables often end up being different vitamins, that they're more predominant in the item itself. Minerals, those are also found in the foods that we consume. And some of them will work like vitamins, which will help with our body processes. So they'll trigger those reactions in our cells, like almost like a spark plug in a car. But other minerals are going to be important for tissues in the body. So you're thinking about calcium, magnesium, okay, that we'll use it to build the structures of our body. So minerals are also required. And finally, the last group or category of nutrient is water. So water is going to provide, obviously, fluid, and we require this fluid to make up our blood plasma. Water will help us regulate our body temperature. It'll also be used to carry nutrients and other chemicals to our cells, and then also to take the wastes away. Varying in estimates, but 45 to 75% of the body weight is water. Water is absolutely essential for survival. We can only go a matter of a few days without water. Whereas we can last, and it's not recommended obviously, but we can last longer with food if in extreme situations where we wouldn't have a choice. But water is required, so that if people are dehydrated, we see very quickly that that performance suffers very rapidly with dehydration. So very exciting. In 2019, the Canada Food Guide has been updated. Now, the first food guide actually came out in 1942, and there has actually been 5 revisions since. The last revision was in 2007. So in the old one, we used to have the different food groups, and it would have recommendations of serving sizes for each food group. So you'd be told that of the fruits and vegetables, you wanted to consume 7 to 8 serving sizes. And in the old food guide, it used to tell you what was understood to be a serving size. So that one, there were just different, I don't want to say criticisms, but there was different weaknesses with the old guide. So in 2019, the Dietitians of Canada have launched a new food guide. This one is very different from the original, and based a lot on the food guides that you see in Brazil and some others in South America. So very well researched food guides. So right off the bat, the main premise is an image of a plate, and you can see that on the slide right in front of you. And the recommendations is that half the plate, so half of the meal that you consume, should be vegetables and fruits. Vegetables and fruits. And of course, it's going to be recommending that those are eaten more often in a whole kind of forms as opposed to processed, and that you get a variety of colors and textures with the vegetables and the fruits. 1/4 of the plate should be foods that are rich in protein. So this would be meat, as we've already discussed, dairy, as well as plant-based options such as beans, legumes, seeds, and tofu. This food guide is really going to be stressing a lot more vegetarian and vegan options. So they're not telling us we need to be vegetarian and vegan, but they are recommending to get more of our our protein needs from plant-based proteins. So you'll see a little bit more suggestions on this. 1/4 of our plate should be whole grains. Whole grains. So rice, quinoa, bread, etc. So if you're having any sorts of pastas, they're recommending whole grain pastas. Now, this plate size is based on a 9-inch plate. So we're going away from these concept of serving sizes. So as opposed to saying I need 7 servings of this food group and this is what a serving size is, instead we're looking at a plate, and you have a 9-inch plate. This is how your meal should be broken down. The other thing that they make very clear, that a glass of water is the drink of choice. In the former editions of the food guide, they listed fruit juices as ways to get in extra fruit servings, etc. That has passed now. They are saying we should be drinking water. It is the ideal beverage. So the big changes, which I've already alluded to here, but we have eliminated the 4 food group categories. So we no longer have the meat and proteins category, the grains category. Instead, we're looking at more of a holistic view of our meals, and we want to think about the plate and how the plate is divided. So no more talking about what portion sizes are. And that protein choices have been shifted so that we're really encouraging more lentils, beans, nuts, and tofu, a lot more plant-based proteins, but also saying that yes, we still have meat, poultry, fish, and dairy. Remember, if you're eating more plant-based protein sources, you're also getting the other nutrients that come along with that plant-based nutrient, so that if you're eating beans, they're going to have vitamins, etc., that are going to be beneficial as well. And also arguably from a whole world standpoint, that by choosing more plant-based proteins, it's more sustainable for the environment. And finally, I mentioned this one too. For me, it's personally very exciting that water is now encouraged as a main source of hydration. So we're not encouraging as much consuming glasses of dairy or using fruit juice for serving sizes or servings. So there's pros and cons. So remember, this is just one of many revisions of the food guide. And so with this revision, there are pros and there are cons to it. So some of the pros, more healthy protein options. So they really are stressing those vegan, vegetarian protein options, which is really nice. As we find that more and more individuals are becoming vegan or vegetarian for their own choices, that, you know, having these options, making them have this kind of food guide that gives them an idea of what they can do and what they can consume. It's very, very important. They actually have parts in this food guide, they encourage people to eat at home and to cook at home. So we really want to start trying to limit packaged or fast food items, because we know packaged and fast food items have higher fats, sodium, and calories. So we try to be realistic, understanding that not everybody can cook a nice home cooked meal every meal. But if we could add a little bit more into that, you know, maybe instead of buying lunch every day, maybe you pack lunch half of the days, you know, that it's more beneficial, you know, so it lets us have more control over our fat and our sodium and calories. In this food guide, they talk about mindful eating, that they really want people to pay attention to the color and texture of the foods that they eat, so that, you know, you're sitting there and you're enjoying your meal, because it's important that we enjoy our food. You're paying attention to it so that we're not distracted by television as we're eating it, or social media as we're eating, but rather we're sitting there and enjoying our meal. That they're telling us to pay attention to our feelings of hunger and fullness, so that we can learn natural cues. I think we're all, at least I am, maybe I shouldn't speak for you, but get guilty of eating when we're not hungry anymore. That we maybe at times need to sort of slow down a little bit and ask ourselves, am I actually hungry right now, or have I had enough to eat? And once again, if I'm stepping away from the screen or stepping away from other distractions when I'm consuming my food, then it lets me pay more attention to our natural cues. And the other thing is they want people to be aware of, to notice, and to manage mental emotions associated with eating. So there's a lot of guilt when it comes to different foods that people often find eating and foods shameful. We want to stop this. They've done studies where they've taken Americans and French people from France, and they've shown them pictures of cake. And when they showed the individuals in France, the French individuals, pictures of cake, they would respond with something like, "Oh, yummy," or "good," or "looks good," any kind of comment along that line. When they showed this same image to Americans, the more common responses were guilty, bad, I shouldn't, not good, negative emotions that we associate with food. Food should be appreciated. Food should be savored. Food should not make us feel guilty for consuming it. So when we sort of put more mindfulness in the food and the enjoyment of the food, then maybe we could start to have a healthier relationship with our meals. Another new change that they have with the new food guide, which is a pro, is that there's an emphasis on eating with others. So to really enjoy our food, to celebrate our food, to be with others. So acknowledge social, emotional, and psychological reasons to eat. Very, very key in creating this healthy relationship. Once again, as North Americans, we have a bizarre relationship with food where, once again, it's often shameful, it's hidden. We're eating by ourselves in our cars as we're driving from point A to point B, as opposed to sitting down with family and friends and loved ones and enjoying our food. And that's not to say you can't eat by yourself, right? There's nothing wrong with eating by yourself, but that we try to, have a healthier, more open relationship. This food guide also starts to discuss how food marketing shapes our food decisions. So being aware of food marketing, knowing that they are marketing to our children, that they're trying to promote things to children, that, and how the role that this can play. And it's fascinating. I encourage you all, take a look into Chile, the country, Chile, their new food marketing rules. And they have very, very strong rules that require zero marketing to children. So when you look at a box of Frosted Flakes, they're not allowed to have Tony the Tiger on. When you look at chocolate Christmas candy, they can't have an image of Santa Claus on. And they're very aware of how susceptible our children are to marketing, that children can't necessarily tell the difference between a television show that they're watching and the commercial that they're seeing. So in Chile, they are making huge changes, and I guess we could always be hopeful that maybe those type of changes can be implemented one day by our government. But until then, be aware of it. Know that they're trying to get you to buy more, that they're trying to get you to consume more. Also, with our food guide, it's now mobile friendly, so you can get apps for your phone, for your iPad, for your tablet, and it's really great. I do encourage you all to go online, look up our new food guide, take a few minutes, and obviously not for your Manitoba Fitness Council exam, but for yourselves. They have different recipes, different ideas, different kind of little blogs and thoughts on there. I would definitely check it out, especially the recipes. I've tried a few of them and they're just fantastic. So now, not everything is perfect. So some cons, some potential downsides to our new food guide. The first is that, there's too much choice. So some can argue that there is too much choice. So before, they try to simplify, they try to categorize our food so that you could look and go, okay, well, I need fruits and vegetables and I need protein. The more openness might be a challenge for some individuals, especially when it comes to food marketing campaigns. Remember that food industry is putting billions of dollars to get you to buy their product, right? So if you're a little confused because there are too many options, it might leave you more susceptible. It's not one that I necessarily feel. I personally feel the more choice is better, but I can understand some might feel too much choice is too much. Next thing is the no serving size. So before we'd be able to say what was considered to be a fruit or a vegetable, etc. So arguably, too, that lack of serving sizes for some people might find it hard to know if they're eating too much. So if they are concerned about their dietary intake, especially for body composition reasons, that it might be a little harder. Once again, I don't personally find this one quite as much. I think that looking at a plate is a really practical, useful way to look at it, but I can definitely respect some people might have issues with it. Now, they also encourage the reading of the food labels, which is a very good pro, but they don't give us much specific instructions. So they say read food labels, and that's sort of where they leave it at. It'd probably be more ideal if they can give us a little bit more guidance on what we should be looking for, what's good, what's bad, what things we're trying to get more of, things that we're trying to limit. It would probably be more beneficial for the average Canadian. Now, in the old food guides, we actually used to, so the rainbow food guide that you all know that we've used in the past, that one actually had a specific version for Indigenous people. So if you had never seen it, it was wonderful. It talked a lot more game meats in that. They'd have, under the grains, they would have stuff like bannock, some more traditional foods that these individuals would have, and which is a very positive thing, a nice pro of the old one, whereas with the new one, we don't have a separate food guide for them. So potentially some cultural choices that they might normally have are not going to be visible in this new guide. Also available, especially with our Indigenous population in Manitoba, some of them live very, very remotely, which can make things quite challenging for them if they're on, they have limited access to things. As well as there's no specific guidelines for infants, pregnant women, or the elderly. So depending on where you're coming from, depending on what you were using the food guide for, this new one can have lots of pros or it can be more filled with some cons. So what's on it is plant-based protein. So as already mentioned, they're encouraging that we get a little bit more protein from our plants. So beans, peas, lentils, soy, seeds, and nuts. These ones are going to be rich in protein, just like our animal proteins. However, they also have fiber, which we know we have in North America that we usually have a relatively fiber deficient diet, so we need to add more fiber. And the other nice benefit of a plant-based protein is that it is lower in saturated fats. So if we could encourage, having even one or two meals a week where the major protein source comes from vegetables, even for non-vegetarians, it's beneficial for them. It's good for the cardiovascular system, as well as good for the digestive system. So when you're hearing terms like meatless Mondays, etc., just a little bit of break. So they're not saying that everyone has to become vegetarian. They're not saying everyone has to become vegan, but rather let's look at other options, see what else there is to it. So when we're dealing with plant-based proteins, it brings up this question and concern about these essential amino acids. When we consume proteins, we will break the protein down into something called amino acids. These amino acids then are reconfigured and used as structural proteins for our body. And there are 20 amino acids that we require. Of these 20 amino acids, 9 of them are considered to be essential. The 9 essential amino acids are essential because we cannot produce them ourselves. So the other amino acids we can create in our body by kind of refiguring some different parts of the protein. Essential amino acids we have to consume in our diet, so they are essential. Animal-based proteins, meat products, those are considered to be complete proteins because when you consume an animal-based protein, you get all 9 essential amino acids within that protein. You don't have to worry about combining different foods. With plant-based proteins, the concern is that any one plant-based protein is not a complete protein. So any one plant-based protein will not have all 9 essential amino acids in it. The concern is whether or not a vegetarian or a vegan is consuming all 9 of these essential essential acids. So if the vegetarian is limited in the foods that they consume, they could, in theory, have a deficiency. Although this is a concern, it's one very easy to get over and to deal with, as that all you have to do as a vegetarian is make sure that you are consuming a variety of plant-based proteins to make sure that your amino acid requirements are all met. So they'll have combinations of different foods, and in fact you'll find that a lot of traditional foods, where you're looking at cultures that had more plant-based protein sources, their traditional combining of foods tended to make a complete protein when they blended them together. So there's no reason that this cannot be easily overcome. It's very easy to deal with. It's just something that vegetarians and vegans need to be made aware of. Historically, too, there was concerns about whether or not they'd be able to have enough iron. And once again, this is just something they need to simply pay attention to in their diet to make sure they are getting everything that they require. On the old version of the food guide, so the one from 2007, we had emphasis on exactly what to eat. These are the food groups, these are the serving sizes, these are how many servings you need. We still have a degree of that when we look at the general visual that they have of the 9-inch plate and the amount of that should be filled with the different types of food. However, the big shift is that we're moving away from that and instead talking about why we're eating food. You know, having mindful eating, having a social component to food. In that, they do address food marketing. Food marketing is a massive concern that a lot of times we're choosing foods and not aware that we're choosing it because we've been programmed, for lack of better terms, programmed to choose the food that we're choosing, that we're constantly being faced with advertising on television, on billboards, on radio commercials, you know, even restaurants. The number of restaurants or shops that you go to that, you know, if you go often enough, if you order something often enough, you get one free. So if you buy X number of meals, you get the next one free, or you'll see this lots of times, lots of marketing right now when it comes to beverages. So yes, the frequent users. You'll see it with McDonald's. I believe Tim Hortons is doing something similar, that you buy X number of beverages and the next one would be free. This is all affecting our decisions, that, you know, it makes you more likely to go to a certain restaurant or stop for a certain coffee. It's making you more likely. And then you know that when they're trying to get you to stop to buy a coffee in the drive-through, that they're trying to get you to also buy a donut or a cookie or something else with it. So it's done very much on purpose. McDonald's too, with their dollar beverages. You know, sure, there might be the odd person that shows up in the summer and buys a Coke for $1 and leaves with that, but a lot of people are buying the meal to go with it. So they're constantly bombarding us. Even within the store, things that are at eye level, they pay a premium to be promoted at eye level. So when you're walking down the aisle, anything at your eye level, that product company has paid more to be at that level, to be placed there. So that you're more likely to see it. If you're more likely to see it, you're more likely to buy it. This also has to do with packaging, that they purposely package things to make it more colorful, to make it more appealing. which leads us into the issue with marketing to children. It's a terrifying world, really, the amount of research they are putting into to get your children to want something. And yes, it might seem harmless marketing to a child, but we know that children have a great influence on their parents. So when your child is constantly asking you to buy them something or constantly asking for something, they have very susceptible brains that they don't realize that their TV show is not on and they're now looking at a commercial. They don't, first of all, don't realize that. And then the food advertisers are banking on the fact that these children are going to then start to bother their parents over and over. Anybody that takes their kids grocery shopping knows how at times frustrating it could be, where they're constantly nagging at you to buy a product, buy a product. And, all of us parents and guardians, you have that moment of weakness where you give in because you're tired of saying no all the time. And children don't have the ability to contrast different products. So, they want that cereal because they like the cartoon character on the front. They don't want it because it's healthy, and often they don't even want it for the taste. They want it because of the associated emotions or images, and that these kind of programming carries on into adulthood. And this is where we have a lot of concern. This is why we're promoting mindful eating, why are you making this choice? Why are you doing this? The more that you cook whole foods at home, the less influence this food marketing can have on you. So there are different ergogenic aids out there, and especially when we're thinking in performance related changes. So one popular one is caffeine. And I'm not talking about having your morning cup of joe to wake up, but rather people will actually use caffeine to improve muscle endurance, muscle strength, our anaerobic power, and our aerobic endurance. And it has been shown to work. So we know caffeine will improve performance because it decreases pain perception. It distorts our rates of perceived exertion, which means it makes us feel like we're not working as hard as we actually are, it was just beneficial. So if you're really working at a 7 out of 10 on rate of perceived exertion, but you feel like you're only working at like 6.5 or 6, then you'll do more. And it also will increase free fatty acid mobilization. So it'll help to mobilize our fat stores to be used as an energy source. So there are definitely some advantages to using caffeine. Now, if you are going to use caffeine to help benefit performance, you have to know what you're doing and you have to experiment. So first of all, Health Canada recommends that adults limit their intake to no more than 400 milligrams per day. Okay, so you want to make sure that if you are ingesting it, that you are limiting the amount that you're ingesting, and keep in mind how much coffee and that you're taking in outside of your workout. So limit that, and also know that it can cause restlessness, anxiety, nervousness, heart palpitations, insomnia, or stomach upset by taking in caffeine. So don't try caffeine for the first time as an ergogenic aid, so helping performance aid, when you run the Manitoba Marathon for the first time. You'll want to experiment with it beforehand. Try smaller dosages. See what dosage you would handle that doesn't cause too much restlessness or nervousness. And once again, you want to limit it to under 400 milligrams per day. The next one's the idea of protein. We use protein to help benefit us, ergogenic aid as well, for muscle growth. So how much protein do we actually need? Dietary protein intake should be between 1.2 to 2.0 grams per kilogram per day. That's how much dietary protein that we should consume. We do get more adaptations if we ingest our protein after our exercise. So if we consume protein after our exercise, and then actually every 3 to 4 hours to ensure a constant level of available amino acids for repairing and remodeling. When it comes to protein powder, whey protein powder is the most usable form of protein powder. Once again, you want to experiment with it just a little bit. Make sure you stay in the healthy ranges that are recommended there on the slide, the 1.2 to 2 grams per kilogram per day. So don't exceed that. I don't mean that, but rather the different forms of protein. You know, some of them you might find in different products, you might find more easily digestible than the others. So if you are going to choose to use a protein powder, it is the most beneficial after your workout. Understand though that most of us don't really lack protein. So we're not requiring a bunch of supplementation. So even as an athlete, even though we require more protein as an athlete, most of our diets already have enough of it. So now you just might want to play around with the timing of it a little bit different. The next one's creatine. So creatine is something that occurs in the muscles naturally. And it helps our muscles release energy in the first few seconds of intense exercise. So when we talk about ATP-PC, that's the adenotriphosphate and creatine phosphate system, creatine phosphate. So it's going to supply, creatine is going to supply the phosphate to the ATP so we can get that high intensity exercise. Now, creatine's actually been very, very well researched. As for all the different types of supplements, it's one of the most researched supplements. And so dietitians of Canada recommend 15 to 25 grams per day for the first 5 to 7 days as a starting dose. After that, the amount would go down again. So you wouldn't maintain at that. Now, really, they are seeing that creatine is safe. They wonder very long term if it might cause an issue, especially with kidneys. So far, they don't have any information showing that it's caused any difficulties, but it might be beneficial maybe to take little breaks from it. So if you're doing very long-term use, you know, kind of cycling off it for a short while, cycling back on it. Some individuals do find gastrointestinal, so stomach and digestive upset with it. So some people experience cramping or diarrhea using it. And once again, it might just be the company that you get it from, or it might just be the individual. And so if you're not metabolizing it properly, if it's disruptive to your digestive system, then it just simply wouldn't be recommended. If you are going to take it, you look for natural product number, an NPN, or a drug identification number to make sure that the product that you are consuming has been reviewed by Health Canada. That would be the safest way. But once again, it has been very well researched, and although they hypothesize it can cause issues to the kidneys, there's never been any documented case of that. Other ergogenic aids, so performance aids, are sports drinks. So research does support the use of sports drinks during high intensity workouts to sustain activity or endurance activities longer than 45 minutes. So there is a benefit to it. However, I feel at times these are massively overused. So if you're using a sports drink, it should be used during the activity as you're doing the activity. So you don't need to be drinking sports drinks throughout the day. There's high levels of sugar in them. There are high levels of the high levels of sugar, which will cause and increase the chances of obesity, chances of tooth decay, etc. So, you know, when we're using Gatorade as our drink of choice, or Powerade, or you name the sports drink, it's irrelevant which brand. When we're consuming those day in, day out as our beverage of choice, we have a lot of problems. So really, unless you're doing a sustained endurance activity, there's no need for that sports drink. Okay, so it's got to be definitely longer than 45 minutes. I've also heard longer than an hour. If it's vigorous activity in very hot or humid weather, then it can be beneficial for youth. Understand too, you could probably make your own version at home where you're using a juice with a small pinch of salt in it. Okay, so use it carefully. It is beneficial. So those that are running long endurance activity, long endurance sports, etc., they'll benefit from it. If it's very hot and humid, they'll get some benefit. But this should not be something that every single workout we're bringing out our sports drink, because there is a lot of sugar and it's defeating the purpose if we're experiencing obesity because of it. So sports bars. So these are becoming very popular. So the research shows that if you're doing long endurance activity, that if you choose a lower glycemic index bar, that it can actually help them to perform better the next day, as well as reduce their blood lactate, which means that it helps prevent the buildup of lactate in their system, which would tell us that they're not relying as heavily on their glycogen system. Now, when I say lower glycemic index bars, that would mean that bars that are absorbed more slowly into the system. So higher glycemic index bar, or moderate or high, that would be one that's broken down into sugars very rapidly in our digestive system that will cause a larger increase in our blood sugar levels after consuming it. So we want one that will have lower glycemic index, so it'll be broken down slower. It won't be absorbed as rapidly into our blood system. Those are the ones that are helping to reduce blood lactate levels, as well as helping the athletes perform better the next day. Big warning with sports bars, though, they have become very common, and once again, to try to market to our tastes, some of them have crazy amounts of sugar and fat. You know, if you take a second and read those food labels and compare them, it's quite shocking how much sugar and fat you will find in one of them. So be very aware of this, that this should be used as an ergogenic aid for sustained endurance activities. However, it should not be used as a day-to-day snack. It's not healthy. You choosing to have a sports bar in the afternoon as a healthy snack, make sure that's what you're actually getting. And that the bar should not be a meal replacement. It cannot replace vitamins, minerals, and other fibers that we should be consuming with natural foods. So if you are choosing a sports bar, so if you're going to use this for performance, pardon me, you want to make sure that you find a bar that has less than 5 grams of fat. And you want to have one that's higher in fiber, so 3 to 5 grams of fiber. By having higher fiber, that will lower the glycemic index of the food, so it'll make it that you absorb the sugars more slowly. Take your time, look at the number of calories. So some calories can range from, or some bars can range from 170 to over 350 calories. That's astronomical number of calories. So be aware of this, that you're not consuming more calories than you plan on consuming when you think you're doing yourself a favor. Ensure that the protein amount supports a pre or post protein intake or during the activity level. So, you know, is it the right amount for something following? So if you're going to be using this as a little bit of boost, especially near the end of the workout, make sure it's the right amounts that you're after. And finally, a sports bar should not be consumed as an office snack. That's the same thing as the Gatorade and those sports drinks. These are for doing activity and while doing activity, not to be munching on in the afternoon. Okay, you know, you're better off having some fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds as an office snack, not a sports bar. So, given a lot of information so far, so how can we make healthier food choices? In Health Canada, I'll give 5 tips for healthy grocery shopping. So if you're going to go to the store, what can you do to better equip yourself? What can you tell your participants? Because remember, your participants are going to be looking to you to give them sound advice. Now, I'm going to make it very clear here, and I'll mention again at the end of this, that you are not a dietitian. You did not go to school and do practicals and write exams, and you're not governed by the Dietitians of Canada. It is not your place to give specific dietary advice. If you have participants or clients that want specific diet plans, that want specific calorie ranges that they should be consuming, you need to send them to a registered dietitian. That is their rule. You are not, unless, by the way, if you are listening to this and you are a registered dietitian, you're the exception, okay? But otherwise, most of you that are listening to this presentation are not registered dietitians. Don't act as when you could put your participants in danger by giving them advice that you might not be qualified to give. However, there are just general things that we can recommend. So obviously, you're going to be recommending the individual look at the Canada Food Guide. Okay? Recommend that they take a look at that. Recommend that they, try to control their food portions and meal sizes by following the recommendations made by our Canada Food Guide with the 9-inch plate and the half fruits, vegetables, quarter grains, and quarter protein. Okay? But then when they go shopping, give them some general advice to help them with their shopping. That when they're going to the grocery store, they should be prepared. They should go there with a list of what they need and a full stomach. So this way they're not going to be as susceptible to food marketing. So that when they're walking down the aisle to be getting some lentils, and instead they passing by the Chef Boyardee and it sure looks good because they haven't ate anything since the morning, they're not falling into that trap. That they're not falling into the trap of the candy at the end of the aisle because they're hungry and they're not prepared. Okay, so be ready. Go in with a full stomach and a list. That you really want to try to fill your cart as much with vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and protein sources that come most often from, or more often, from plants. So sit there and go in prepared, look for some beans, look for some legumes, have some recipes ready that you've had a chance to review. That would be a plant-based protein source. When you're looking at your cart, do you have vegetables, fruits, whole grains? Take a moment when you get home, look at your shopping habits, see where you can make improvements. Be aware of what your weaknesses are. If you get home and after, a month of shopping, you realize you haven't bought any plant-based protein, then maybe that's something that you can look into. Also, make healthier choices for the environment, right? So be environmentally conscious. Bring your own shopping bags so that products have less packaging. And opt for bulk so that if you're going to be doing something that the individual packaging is a large amount, maybe in bulk it might be a lot less garbage going in, right? A lot less plastic used. And really, try to make an impact at your grocery store. Ask them to carry healthier options. Yeah? Ask them to have these different choices available so that people can make these choices. So other things to make food choices, if we're trying to encourage people to consume more whole foods as opposed to processed food, the best advice is to shop the perimeter of the grocery store, the outside edges of the grocery store. That's where we find the fresh fruits and vegetables. That's where we find the bakery section, that the bakery where you would have the fresh grains and that, as opposed to the grains that have been more processed on the inside aisles. That is where you find the dairy department. That is where you find the meat department. Okay. Food labels, they must actually contain a nutrient list, a serving size, calories, nutrients, and a percentage of daily values, which is based on a 2,000 calorie diet. Okay. So we're going to just talk in just a moment that we've had to update our, or not we, but the food industry has had to update their labels, and we're going to talk about how they've done this to make things more clear. The other thing you should really realize that when it comes to using food labels is that a percentage daily value of less than 5% is considered low. And that seems to be, the word low is missing from the slide, but understand that it's low. So if you find that it's 2% fiber, well that's low. And so that would not be considered an ideal amount of fiber. That said, too, if it's less than 5% fat or sodium, that's also low, which would make that product more beneficial. A daily percentage value of greater than 15% is considered high. So if we're looking at something that's desirable, we'd want it to have greater than 15%. If it's something like sugars, we wouldn't want it to have greater than 15%. When we start to look closer at food labels, we're able to compare products with its competitors a little bit better. So if I know that under 5% is low, above 15% is high, it gives me a better idea of which item I want to have, or maybe potentially I don't want to choose that item at all. So we're going to see all these different changes that have been made. Other things that the Canada Food Guide talks about is making our healthier food choices. So they do try to give us some suggestions on how to make healthier choices when we're eating at coffee shops, at fast food outlets, at restaurants, at cafeterias. So it's going to recommend ordering smaller size coffee cappuccinos or ice drinks, so that if you're having a beverage that has calories in it, order the smaller size. We don't all need the venti frappuccino. We can instead get a small latte or an iced latte instead. When you go to a restaurant, take some time, ask some questions about the way that the food is prepared. Get that information from them. Maybe that you're choosing steamed or broiled, or, as opposed to fried. Make some choices there. One of the problems with eating out, and it doesn't have to be a problem, but one of the problems is often we don't realize how things are being prepared. So we're not taking into the account that a product's being deep fried and the number of calories and fat that come along with it. Or we're not aware of the amount of sodium or salt that's added. So if we start to ask questions about these things, and then we can make choices, we can ask them to limit the amount of salt that they're putting on a product, that we're asking them to steam it instead. Also ask for more vegetables. Quite often in restaurants, you can get rid of some of the, maybe less nutritious things such as French fries. You can get those subbed often for fresh vegetables, which will be much more beneficial, give us a lot more nutrients, a lot more vitamins, while limiting some of the extra additional fat. So when it comes to nutritional labels, as I was mentioning, that there are new guidelines in effect that explain to us better how our nutritional facts and our food labels have to change too. So here on each of these screens, we're taking a look at what the original was and what the new version is. So to the left of your screen, you can see the original food label. Now you can see the new ones. Okay. First of all, calories is larger and it has to stand out more with bold line below. So you could see that 110 calories much clearer, so you could see. Okay. Our serving size will stand out more and is more similar on similar foods. So once again, it's clear to what a serving size would be. The daily values is updated. Okay, percentage daily values, that's going to be based on an individual that has a 2,000 calorie per day diet. Okay, that there's new percentage daily values for total sugars, so we'll talk about that briefly as well. We have an updated list of the minerals of public health concerns. We'll discuss this in a moment as well. And that they have to have a new percentage daily value footnote. So we've already discussed it that 5% or less is considered to be a little, whereas 15% or more is considered to be a lot. So we're going to discuss some of these changes. Let's see them individually. So first of all, the list of ingredients. Okay. So they're having to make the list of ingredients more clear. So there's now a minimum type height requirements, so that it's a little bit easier to read for individuals, that there's going to either be bullets or commas to separate ingredients, that there's a white or neutral background, and that food colors have to be listed by name, To also, for simplicity of reading things, is that the two titles, ingredients and contains, have to be done in bold print, and that they have to use black font. What's a big one that you can clearly see here is sugars. Is now the sugars have to actually be grouped together. So all the sugar-based ingredients have to be grouped together. And once again, we'll see an example of how it used to be. All right, so some different things. Foods in a single serving container. So what happened before, if you have a single serving container, so such as the example of milk, okay, so you would buy this container of milk and you would consume it as a single serving. So in the past, they might not do that whole container and give you the nutritional facts for that whole container. So you can see on the left, even though it's 473 milliliters, they give the nutritional facts of only 1 cup of it. Okay? Versus now, because it's in a single serving container, they have to give the nutritional facts for that entire serving. So now it's been changed that they have to do it per 1 carton, so that 473 milliliters. They can't break that down into smaller servings if it's already in a single serving container. Okay. So foods that can be measured. Before, it could be hard to compare. Right? So that here you had yogurt A and yogurt B, and one of them is for a cup and the other one is for half a cup, or a third of a cup. One of them is for a third of a cup, one of them is for half a cup. That would be very confusing for an individual, right? So how you're sitting there doing the math, trying to figure things out, right? So instead, what they've done is that they've standardized the different companies have to give it in the same format, right? So in this case, in the bottom, they're like 3/4 of a cup. Both of them are given the same amount, so that when you look at that product, you are knowing that you're looking for 3/4 of a cup, and it's valuable. So that all of a sudden, it'll show you much more clear if you have too high of sugar for one or too high of fats for one, because you're looking at the same thing, the same serving size in the products. So yeah, once again, if you're comparing similar products, the new rule for food labels is that the serving amount needs to be the same. So once again, 2 different companies, 2 different yogurts, they have to give the same serving size so that you can compare the different products. So once again, foods that come in pieces or divided. So once again, this is going to end up looking at a lot more. So they use the example of crackers. Once again, before it could just be, it could be the same, before it was there, the same number of crackers, okay? So in this example, it's 8 crackers, right? But if you look, the amount of grams behind those 8 crackers are dramatically different, okay? So that one of them has twice the number of grams as the other one does. Now, the new way to make it easier to compare is that it's standardizing that serving size. So if you look, now they're a lot closer. So one, even though it's 6 crackers, and the other one is 11 crackers, the number of grams are about the same, so that you know the amount that you would ingest, that serving size is going to be similar. So obviously in this example, cracker B is going to be a much more lightweight kind of cracker, which is why you would consume more of them. But to get that same sense of fullness, to get the same sense of overall grams of food, you'd have to have more to compare it. So once again, when you're looking at these foods that can be divided or come in different pieces, now you get a better idea that you're comparing similar quantities, overall quantities of it. Also now with foods that we have that are eaten in certain amounts. So before, you might have 2 different types of breads. One's comparing the nutritional facts for a single slice of bread. The second one's comparing the nutritional facts for 2 slices of bread. Well, in reality, we tend to consume usually 2 slices of bread at once, okay? Because that's going to be your classic example of a sandwich. So now when they're comparing them, they now have to go, okay, we would normally eat 2 slices of bread in a serving or in a sitting. And so therefore the nutritional facts have to be for 2 slices of bread, not a single slice or a bread, because very rarely does somebody have a piece of bread. They often have a sandwich. So once again, they're trying to make this so that when you're looking at these bread A and bread B, you're looking at the nutritional information for 2 slices, for the amount that you would use for a sandwich. All right, for sugars, very key one. So now when they're looking at sugars, they need to do total sugars. They have to keep total sugars very, very clear and talk about percentage of daily value for the total sugars. So before they just had to give a number, and now you need to know what percentage of your total, your percentage of daily value that would have. And that gives us information. So now if you know this product is greater than 22% of our daily value, we know that is now considered high. It's greater than 15%. So it gives us more of an information as opposed to looking at just 22 grams of sugar. That doesn't necessarily mean anything to somebody. And with the list of ingredients with sugar, now we no longer have those more hidden sugars. So previously, they might have fancy molasses, brown sugar, and then sugar all done separately. So you might look at this and somebody might in a glance go, oh yeah, it doesn't look to be too much sugar. Well, now the way that it's done is those have to be combined. So now when you look at that product, guess what? The first ingredient is not flour, it's sugars. So when they're all combined, it lets you realize these foods that are higher in sugars than previously thought. So back to this big question about protein. So we have seen already recommended levels of protein. We've seen that it's beneficial to have protein following our workout, that, it'll help us with the absorption of the protein and being able to utilize it. But do we actually need more protein? And I've already talked about this. Yes, it does increase our need for exercise, does increase our need for protein. That's absolutely true. However, most physically active individuals already eat enough. They already are consuming enough. If you have or your participants have any major concerns about protein and they're worried they're not getting enough, perhaps it doesn't have to be this way, but perhaps they are vegan or perhaps they are vegetarian, your best line of action is to send them to talk to a registered dietitian who can get them to record the amounts, will know more accurately how much is in each of the foods they're choosing. But for the most of us, we're getting enough. Already mentioned this, where should you shop for groceries? Always remember to shop around that perimeter. So we're getting the produce, the bakery, the dairy, and then the deli. So back in the day with our food groups, that would hit all of our food groups. We don't talk about food groups anymore. We've moved away from that. Once you've filled up most of your cart with the perimeter, that's when you go into the aisles. That's where we'll find some canned products that we would need, some frozen, and some packaged food group choices. But we want to make sure the most is in the whole food. 5 just general key steps that we should do to promote nutritional health. We need to make sure that we are consuming a variety of foods. Variety is key. That we emphasize fruits and vegetable servings each day. So half of our plate should be fruits and vegetable servings. That when we're choosing dairy products and meat products, that we're choosing lower fat dairy and that we're picking leaner cuts of meat. And that we prepare foods with little or no fat. Now, if they've already have foods with have naturally half fats in, we can get away with lower fats. Remember, fat is not bad, but we have to be careful with it, that we're not over consuming it, that we're choosing healthier sources of fat, that we're obviously staying away from trans fats and limiting our saturated fats. We want to make sure that we achieve and maintain a healthy body weight by enjoying regular physical activity and healthy eating. So we want to make sure that we're encouraging our participants to move a lot, to be physically active, and to choose healthy options for eating, but that we still celebrate food. We don't want to have restrictive food diets. You still want to be able to enjoy your life. We want to tell them to limit salt, limit alcohol, and limit caffeine. And finally, a little word about dehydration. Does dehydration affect performance? Yes, it does. Our exercise performance is impaired when the individual is dehydrated by as little as 2% of body weight. And that's where it's going to start to affect performance. And that losses in excess of 5% of body weight can decrease the capacity for work by about 30%. That's substantial. Remember, as you're exercising, you are sweating. So as we sweat, we're losing our water. So we want to make sure we're consuming water before, during, and after activity. That you make sure that people are coming to your fitness classes, that they feel comfortable and confident to grab water whenever they need to grab water. So in my classes, I often will let them know that there will be an official water break, but to recommend that they grab water just to keep their feet moving when they do so that we don't worry about any blood pooling. So water is key. Recommended levels are about 9 to 12 cups of water a day. So that is a great deal of water. Encourage people to have a refillable container. Encourage them to take it with them. We have to have water to sustain life. Now on to some discussion questions. First one, what is a complete protein? And provide some examples. Remember, a complete protein is a protein that contains all 9 essential amino acids. And a complete protein is actually going to come from meat-based protein, animal-based proteins. Those would be complete. The incomplete proteins are plant-based, which we get around the fact that they're incomplete by making sure we have a diet that has a combination of different protein sources. What percentage of dehydration affect exercise performance? At 2% of dehydration. So once you've lost 2% of body weight from dehydration, that will affect your exercise performance. So you want to making sure that people are staying hydrated before, during, and after exercise. Thank you.